Hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today for Cybersecurity, Act Before You Are Hacked. Okay, my name is Nathan Holmes. I'm the technical director, or technical trainer here at Access Networks. I have over 20 years in the custom AV industry. I was with Access Networks' second dealer starting in 2007. I'm a CDIA certified networking specialist, a CDIA certified instructor. I'm also a member of the CDIA Tech Council, and I'm Ruckus Wireless WISE certified. For those of you unfamiliar with Access Networks, we provide industry-leading, enterprise-grade networking solutions for the modern home. We provide custom network design and support, and our certified IT team has backgrounds in both the IT and AV industries. I'm sure it seems like every time you turn on the news nowadays, you hear about some new cybersecurity breach or data being lost or hacked or a ransomware event. And as the frequency and severity of these security breaches has increased, so has our need to develop and implement information security programs. We need to understand the risks, the impacts and implications to our businesses when developing a plan of prevention, and then we need to know how to implement this plan so that we can reduce the risk for information loss within our businesses due to intentional or unintentional actions. To start off with today, I'm going to go through an introduction of what is information security. We'll talk about some of the risks to your business, and then a few of the elements that are needed when you think about how to protect information. This will lead us into the bulk of the presentation, which is how to create and implement an information security program. At the end, of course, we'll do a summary and a thank you, and we will have time for Q&A, so please, during the presentation, feel free to ask questions. We will get to as many questions as we can before the end of the presentation, and then I will follow up afterwards with any that remain unanswered. To start with, we need to really define what is information. Now, the dictionary defines it as data that is both accurate and timely, specific and organized for a purpose, presented within a context that gives it meaning and relevance, and that can lead to an increase in understanding or decrease in uncertainty. Okay, that makes sense, but what does that really mean for us in our businesses? Well, data is what we use day in and day out to conduct business, from financial information to customer details to personal employee information, project details, et cetera, et cetera. These are all the things we use day in and day out, and we need to protect this data. Most of the time in most business today, this is going to reside on PCs, databases, in a digital format. But it doesn't have to. This also refers to, hard copies of things. Okay, what is security? Well, it's defined as precautions taken to guard against crime, attack, sabotage, espionage, etc. What do we do to protect ourselves? When we combine these, we get information security, otherwise known as InfoSec, which is the practice of preventing unauthorized access, use, disclosure, modification, disruption, recording, inspection, or destruction of information. And it's a really generalized term that can be used regardless of whether or not we're talking electronic or digital data or physical data. Both of these need to be protected. When we are focusing on the electronic aspects of protection, which is really what we're going to get into today, this is cybersecurity, which is essentially the body of technologies, processes, and practices which are designed to protect networks, computers, our programs from attack or damage or unauthorized access. InfoSec breaches, they happen in a multitude of different ways, so we need to think about how they happen and where they happen and ways to protect ourselves in regards to them. I mean, you probably saw in the news, last year where we had a massive DDoS attack that brought down some Amazon servers, caused, millions of dollars of lost revenue from the companies that were using them. Even though it was only down for a few hours, this was very disruptive. Or how about a web hosting company that had to pay $1 million ransomware to get their files unencrypted so all of their customers could have their files back? To a networking company that through a phishing email inadvertently sent $46 million to a hacker. They were able to recover $15 million, but we're still talking over $30 million lost due to a security breach. Or a hospital that had to pay $17,000 ransom to hackers because it was a lot less expensive than having to bring all of their equipment and services back up, and the loss of time and revenue they would have in the process. Or let's look at a personal side of things. How about 1.5 billion accounts stolen from Yahoo? Or a database of over 198 million U.S. voters left exposed on an unsecured server. And things don't necessarily happen just in the U.S. I mean, hackers have hit dozens of countries exploiting, stolen NSA tools, and can even be something more life-threatening, like when the WannaCry virus hit traffic lights and speed cameras in Australia. And there's many, many more of these events. I just wanted to highlight a few to show that it's not just one thing we're protecting and one way that we can protect. We have to think about all facets, which really shows the need for having a fully developed and implemented information security program. What this is a set of protection strategies for managing information security within a particular or defined environment, such as a business or your home. And it includes processes, tools, and policies which are necessary to prevent, document, detect, counter threats to digital and non-digital information, along with monetary and physical assets. And it's a living document or program. It's not a one-time solution, but a continuous effort which needs to be integrated into your day-to-day business strategy. Now, you may ask, why is this relevant to my business? I have a small business, and the hackers are only going to attack the big guys that have big money and big data to go after. But the reality is, companies that implement information security programs are less appealing to hackers and cyber criminals. Therefore, the hackers and cyber criminals are increasingly successful when they're focusing on less secure businesses. And small businesses are often viewed as soft targets, for information, compromised devices, money. It's an easy target because they don't have as many employees to dedicate to this. And additionally, other than just protecting from a outside source trying to get in, what about unintentional events like human error, accidentally deleting a file you need, or device failure, or acts of God, lightning, fires, floods, tornadoes. These are all things that are relevant and need to be addressed in this program. Even something as simple as employee turnover. Think of how much more impactful employee turnover is on a small business than a large business. You really need to incorporate that into your InfoSec program. When we look at risks to our businesses, we have to look at a lot of different things. Some of the most important things are financial impact. Business downtimes, ransomware. These are specific, financial, things that technically, if they're large enough, could actually force you to shut down the business or leave you open to lawsuits, which again could cause you to shut down the business. But what about, just plain the public release of proprietary information? Software designs, pricing. These are the things that can cause a decrease of reputation, and when that happens, clients are the first thing to run from you to competition when they think there's a reputation issue. So you have to be aware of that and plan for that. Additionally, it's not just the risk to your business. There are many risks to customers and employees, but I think the biggest one to be aware of is you're revealing personal information, which can lead to identity theft for them, or let's say you're a business that has, security information or, secure information for your clients. That can increase the risk of burglary, and vectors outside of your company. So there are risks to more than just your organization. Which brings us into the elements of this protection. We know now, okay, we've seen that there's risks to our company, our employees, our customers, and we need to look at that when protecting them, because we want to protect all three of these, because they're going to be protected in different ways. And as long as we keep all three of them in mind while we're creating our InfoSec program, we can incorporate the right safeguards into it. When we actually look at protecting the information itself, there's primarily three aspects we look at: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. This is the CIA of information protection. Confidentiality refers to protecting information from unauthorized access or disclosure. Think about what would happen to your company if your customer information or their credit card information was stolen. You can't have that. What about your business financials? What if these were exposed, to everyone? I mean, these are things that you need to protect and keep confidential, not for just the world, but employees and everyone involved. That brings us to integrity, which is protecting information from unauthorized modification. We want to make sure that when we access a file, it's the exact same way it was when we left it. I mean, think about what happened to your company if your payroll information was changed, or your financial information was changed, and you thought, oh yeah, we can afford to buy this building, and you realize, no, that was not correct. You don't have the cash flow needed. Now you're in a bad spot. Integrity is very important. Additionally, availability needs to be considered, preventing disruption in how you access information. I mean, what if all of a sudden all the relevant information needed for your taxes has been deleted off of a server, and you can't file your taxes, or you can't access your email accounts, or other important business files? All the proposals for a client are gone. To a server being down, it might disrupt you only for a little while, but how much loss of revenue is that? How do you ensure that the CIA elements of information protection are all implemented? To do that, you need to create and implement an information security program within your business. Now, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, has created a wonderful cybersecurity framework to assist in implementing an InfoSec program. I put the link here. Please, feel free to go there, read the framework. There's a lot of information in there, and they've broken everything down into 5 functions and associated categories. Any good information security program should follow this entire framework. We start with the identify process. This basically is what processes and assets within our company need protection. And once we define that, how do we protect them? What safeguards are available? And once the safeguards are in place, how can we detect if there's an information security event happening? Okay, what techniques can we use? Then if there is an event happening, how can we contain that impact and minimize its effect on the company? And then how do we recover from that? Once this has happened, how do we restore all these capabilities? Now, even though there's 5 different categories, 90% of your time and effort should be spent on identifying, protecting, and detecting. Hopefully you never have to get into respond and recover, but even if you do, the idea is that majority of your time will be spent in identifying and protecting and detecting so that you never have to respond and recover. And the functions are organized in such a way that they really aid in helping you to understand your cybersecurity risk, how to manage that risk, address threats, and then improve from learning from previous activities. And the nice thing is the functions also align with a lot of existing methodologies for incident management and allow you to help show the impact on how much a small investment in cybersecurity can really protect the entire company in the long run. So I would say, get familiar with these so that as you're approaching the stakeholders and executives in the company, you can really show them what type of benefits you'll get by implementing now. We're going to start with the identify function. I know there's a question that came up. Can you post the NIST line back up long enough so we can write it down? The whole presentation will be available afterwards, and it can be Googled, but we'll get to that at the end. We have a lot to cover today. There's a lot of information here. So we're going to dive into the first function, which is identify, which is where you really develop an organizational understanding of what your risks are, how to manage those risks in relation to the assets and data that your company has. Basically, what do you have as assets and processes, and what needs protection? We're going to start with, in your business environment, what are your roles and responsibilities? Who is responsible for implementing the information security program within the business? Well, typically the business owner or executive in charge of IT, they've got general program oversight and accountability. They're on butts on the line to make sure that everything works well, and their responsibility is to make sure that the entire company is protected. But they're typically going to identify or assign one employee as the primary information security representative. And on top of that, you're going to have direct employees, which are used to implement, policies and procedures on a granular level, and you need to decide if that's going to be an on-staff employee or contracted labor that you bring in. Many times using contracted labor allows for, a more objective view and somebody whose entire focus is doing that at that time, whereas, partially tasking an employee, they may be distracted by some other things. So a lot of times I recommend using outside contracted labor for a lot of things dealing with security. Additionally, human resources has a lot of responsibilities and a big role in information security with delivery and acceptance of policies and training. You need to make sure that everyone has been trained, they understand the policies, and that they sign so that they're aware of this. Also, an employee needs to know, hey, who do I contact if an InfoSec event occurs? Typically, it's going to be the information security representative, but either way, it might be somebody else, and it needs to be defined within the InfoSec program and provided to all employees so they know where to go should something happen. One other thing that needs to be defined in here is when an event happens, who manages or resolves each of these InfoSec events? It may seem silly, but you need to have this documented so that if something happens, immediately we know. Generally it's going to be both the InfoSec representative and the IT technician, but maybe just the IT technician based on the severity of the event. So you need to document this. The next area refers to asset management, which is the information you need to protect, the physical devices you need to protect, software platforms, applications, external / cloud systems. You need to identify your assets and their associated vulnerabilities. You need to collect threat information and vulnerability information from information sources. This is where having an outside contractor sometimes is really helpful, as their entire role in information security is being aware of everything going on current vulnerabilities and helping to ensure that you've considered them. Because you need to identify potential business impacts and the likelihood for your business, because each business is going to have different types of likelihoods of an event. And once you determine the likelihood, determine the risk of this, and how much risk you're willing to sustain. What are actual vulnerabilities and the impact to our organization? Once you know this, you can prioritize each of these risks and define what your responses will be. A lot of times, I put this slide up just to show there's a lot of different software applications out there that can help you gather the information on all of the digital assets you have in your company. From the hosts and the host names and IP addresses to MAC addresses or just serial numbers. These are all things you need to collect so you know what equipment you have, what equipment each employee has. You've ensured that you can track this, and you've got baseline information as to how this should be performing, and just there's tons of different software tools, and depending on how much granularity you need, you'll choose the one that works best for your company. But the whole idea is to make sure you have documents of all of your assets and their associated vulnerabilities. The next thing we're going to talk about is, the governance, legal, regulatory side of things. There are laws in every single state that affect our businesses, and especially when it comes to relevant privacy laws, it's really important you know where those are within your company when developing an InfoSec program. For example, if you're doing an information security investigation, are you allowed to capture network traffic? Are you allowed to look into employees' emails or personal files located on a company computer? What about, is the employee required to provide access to their personal device if it's been used for business activities? The answer to these questions varies from state to state. So you must ask an attorney in your relevant state and ensure that you have a firm understanding of these and anything else that might be related to this when you develop your program so that it's clear to both you and the employees. When you establish your information security policy, for example, there's a little bit of ours on the side, you need to have a full document that states, your priorities, constraints, risk tolerances, assumptions, and you use this to support your operational risk decisions. Essentially, it's a policy that defines for an employee what's allowed and not allowed for an employee to do with business computers and information. It will also address privacy aspects, and it will indicate to the employee who owns the information security. The policy, you'll notice I put the signature portion of ours up there. It must be acknowledged by all employees and added to the new employee documentation. Human Resources needs to ensure that any new hire or existing employee is aware of the information security policy and how it relates to their particular position. Risk assessment, I think, is probably the most difficult and one of the most important things to do when developing an InfoSec program. And generally, this is the area where most companies will hire an outside contractor to provide this because you need to have a complete understanding of the cybersecurity risk to your organization. You need to identify all the different vulnerabilities to your assets. Threat and vulnerability information has to be, up to date. You're going to have to receive it constantly from information sharing programs, forum sources, and you need to think about threats that are not just internal and not just external. You got to have both and identify and document what those are for your company. What are the potential impacts and likelihoods to your company, and what is the risk associated with them? Do we really see, it exists out there, but it's not going to affect us, or this is something we really need to consider? And once we know what those risks are, we need to define responses and prioritize them. I like the picture on the right because it shows that risk assessment is an ongoing facet of information security. It's always changing, always evolving. Daily the risks change, or the potential attacks can change, and so that changes the potential risk to your company. And even if it's annually, you need to always, reassess what the risk means to your organization. And having a documented risk assessment allows you to do that on an item-by-item basis to see what has, what is still a risk, what is no longer a risk, and then see what additional risks you need to add. Once you've defined, all of the risks that you have, now you need to manage these risks. This is where you establish risk management processes, and you get all of the executives and stakeholders to understand, how important this is and what their roles will be in each of the facets of your organization. And overall, this allows you to develop what your risk tolerance for the company is, and have a game plan going forward of how important information security is to your business. Okay, that was the identify portion, which you can see is definitely, there's a lot of information in there. Let's go into protect. Now that we've identified what we need to protect, how do we protect it? What safeguards are applicable to our company and our data? The first, I think, easiest to understand in protection is access control. You need to limit who can access different assets, facilities, devices, and you need to provide accountability. You do not want to use generic accounts if you can avoid it. You want to require individual accounts and then manage access controls on a per need-to-know basis. Not every employee in your company needs to access, the routers, switches, firewalls of the network, or your servers, or the communication or control systems, but some do. And for those that do, don't use your personal Active Directory accounts, but create a new personal admin Active Directory account so that they're unique and separated, and they have different sets of security related to them. If you do need to provide generic passwords, then use a secure application like LastPass so you can avoid having to broadcast, transmit generic passwords to tons of people. Minimize them and remove them if possible, but if you have to use them, do something with a secure application. Also, use secure protocols to connect to network devices. For instance, use SSH, not Telnet. Use HTTPS, not HTTP. And, this is one I find it should make sense to a lot of people, but they don't always think about it, is you need to manage who does and does not have remote access to your business network. You want to provide VPN access only to people who need it, and you need to be actively aware of who has this access and revoke it when it's no longer needed. For example, if you provided access to a vendor, revoke it when either they're done with whatever they need to, or when you switch to another vendor. Or if an employee leaves, you need to revoke their access as well. You need to integrate access control and cybersecurity into HR processes. Like I said, revoking access for an employee leaving the company, and on top of that, you need to assure redundancy to your admin accounts. If you've got one employee who's in charge of managing your server and content, and he leaves, and he's the only employee with admin access, that puts your company in a really bad position. So you need to ensure that you have redundancy to admin accounts in case one's leaving, either voluntarily or involuntarily. Additionally, manage physical access to assets like communication cabinets and rooms. Not everybody needs to be in there, and the ones that are, well, they've got a level of responsibility that they're supposed to be there. The next thing to think about is really awareness and training. The greatest attack vector within information security is human weakness. I mean, phishing scams and ransomware, they use email as a first attack vector. So it's vitally important that you increase, InfoSec awareness and training to all of your employees. I mean, it's only going to be as strong as the weakest link in the employee chain. So use every tool that you have at your disposal. We, for instance, use a company called KnowBe4 to provide, initial training on information security to our employees, and then providing ongoing training on a regular basis to ensure that all employees are brought up to date on current things they need to be aware of. And it also forces, from a human resources side of things, we can document who has taken these courses, have they passed the test. We can verify that not only have they been exposed to the information, but they've demonstrated that they understand what they've learned. And you're also going to have to provide specialized training for privileged users, like admins, finance, management. They've got different levels of access to the company and or positions that are higher targets, so they're going to need some different training. When it comes to protecting data, we need to think about two different types of data protection. One is when we protect data at rest, data that's stored on hard drives or other storage devices. If you've got sensitive files or sensitive data, encrypt these files or disks when needed. This can be done using, operating system encryptions like BitLocker on Windows to other applications. But the whole idea is if you need to encrypt the whole disk, do so. If you haven't encrypted the disk, but you still need to encrypt, a portion of data, encrypt that file or that folder using encryption applications. Or, just password protect your Word, Excel, or zip files. The idea is to understand that when you have sensitive information that you do not want modified, there are a lot of tools at your disposal, and you need to determine what the risk is associated with each of those types of data and use the appropriate tools. In addition to data at rest, we also need to protect data when it's in transit, when it's being transmitted over the internet. You want to do things like use secure communication like HTTPS or encrypt the files that are sent over email. And whenever possible, you want to use secure VPN connections. This will protect that tunnel of information when you're sending it. Within the information protection processes and procedures, this is where we are going to create security policies. These are policies that produce processes and procedures that we use to manage the protection of information, systems, and assets. Things like, okay, we all think about we've got to back up critical information, but the policies will tell us how to do that. And we need to determine internally, are we doing this with RAID arrays? Are we doing it in internal storage, external cloud storage? As a company, where are we backing up our information to? And test it. We know we want to back up documents and databases and customer data, but you need to test it every so often to make sure that the backups are actually working correctly. And you want to do daily backups. There's a lot of companies that'll even go, twice daily backups. The idea is if you happen to have an event which causes you to lose data, the most you've lost is 1 day. And you can make it more often than that. But I mean, I remember, years ago working and losing, days or weeks of effort that I put in when a hard drive failed, and how frustrating that was, and how much, it forced me to start using daily backups on everything. It can happen, and when it does, it's really frustrating, especially when it's so simple to do, daily backups. You want to test this at least once a year by restoring the information and verifying its validity. Another thing that I can't stress enough is when it comes to networking and servers and computers, always install UPS units. This increases their availability, meaning you're less susceptible to power failures and downtime, and allow you, most battery backups that you buy, they're not designed to provide hours and hours and hours of protection. What they're designed to do is allow you time to save your documents, save your information, and then shut the computer down before you lose everything you've been working on. Again, one more step in ensuring you have no loss of data or information. We also need to create an incident response plan. What do we do within the company? How do we react to an information security event? And then test it. Within it should have details relating to how do we stop or minimize an InfoSec event? What should we do? What procedures should we use when investigating this incident? This goes back to knowing the laws of your state and what the privacy laws are for internal and external. We need to restore the information, all the affected resources. And then who within our company needs to be reported, brought apprised of the situation and told that this is going on. Here's how it affected us. Here's the potential loss. Here's how we're going to recover. Within that, you have to create a disaster recovery plan and what we refer to as business continuity plans. How do we keep the business running if we have a really severe information event? And this isn't just somebody attacking the company. I mean, it could be a ransomware where all the files in the company have now been encrypted, and we've got to either pay the ransomware or restore everything. But that could also be a stolen PC, an office fire, an accidental deletion of an important database. These are all different events that you want to think of the worst case scenario and ensure that you've come up with a plan for how to recover from that, and then test it. Test it on an annual basis. Restore the backup to a temporary system and verify that it's usable. Another thing to consider within that is cybersecurity insurance. This has become very, very commonplace, and many insurance providers are providing specific cybersecurity insurance for small and medium-sized businesses. It's become the most requested and sought after insurance edition by small businesses. And it's not just for the protection of client data and information, which that is the biggest percentage of concern, but it's also for credit card information and making sure that your intellectual property is protected. What happens if you have damage to brand resolution? Things like that. For example, when we were evaluating cybersecurity insurance for our company, we evaluated 3 different providers. And what we found was remarkable is that within each of the different providers, they all view what should be protected, how it should be protected, and what you receive for protection very differently. And so I can't stress enough how much you need to evaluate your potential providers, see which is going to best suit your company, your needs, and sometimes it could be more than one, but be aware of what your protections are and how to access those protections if you need to. Additionally, this should go without saying, but you've got to maintain all of the equipment within your information system platform. You've got to patch systems and applications on a regular basis. Use automatic system updates from Windows, or Mac, and upgrade the firmware on all your network-capable devices. There's a reason manufacturers spend so much time developing firmware patches and fixes. Is there's always new attack vectors for people to try to get into your organization, and these patches and upgrades will protect you more than you were previously. It's important to always use these and always upgrade. And obviously, you want to use antivirus and anti-malware programs, but you have to update those on a daily basis. There's always new viruses coming out, new malware, new attack vectors, so update daily to ensure that you are protected as much as possible. In addition to that, within each technology, you've got to be aware of how to use that technology in a way that is secure and that supports all the policies you have within your InfoSec program or procedures. Take Wi-Fi access, for instance. I think we're all aware that you do not ever want to use open networks at all. It's just not something we want to embrace. We've seen that it's too easy to track, do packet captures and people get hacked. So we know we want to use, WPA2 with a pre-shared key, but are you aware that that should be at least 20 characters long? It should have a minimum of one uppercase, one lowercase, one number, and one special character. By utilizing these parameters, yeah, it may seem a little bit cumbersome, but most of our devices nowadays, they store these passwords and can keep them. So yeah, you enter it once and it may be a little cumbersome, but in the end, you can absolutely use that over and over again in a way that is not really detrimental to your experience. Also, when it comes to email, there's filters like Proofpoint that allow you to monitor and prevent spam and things like that from entering into your regular email, and hopefully prevent from phishing emails and things like that. Proofpoint's a very good service, and there's others out there, but the whole concept is to use something to be actively aware and actively protecting yourself within the technology. Sorry. You also want to use DNS filters. DNS filters like OpenDNS or Umbrella, things like that, allow you to protect your organization from people on your network going to different sites, doing site filtering, things like that. So DNS filters exist for a reason, and they're an absolute part of information security. Okay, so now we've talked about how to identify and protect, but now how do we detect? How do we know that there's a cybersecurity event happening? What techniques can we use? Well, one of the biggest things is, you want to be able to understand and be aware when an anomaly or event occurs. So you want to perform vulnerability scans on all the devices on your network. You scan PC servers, IoT devices, and initiate another scan from the internet towards your public IP addresses. You want to know, where are vulnerabilities? Where can somebody potentially attack me from? And a lot of times you may hire a professional to perform the scan, especially outward looking in, or you can use software like OpenVAS or similar. And you want to ensure that all vulnerabilities are found, prioritized, and then you address them. Additionally, we have what's referred to as security continuous monitoring. You want to keep logs of your network devices, servers and security applications, so that you've got historical data. And you want to send these logs to a syslog server so that you can maintain this. And you have this over a long period of time, so you can see where the baseline responses on things are. And it's not just something that's going to get lost. A particular device fails. You want them to be stored somewhere so you can access them. And you need to be updated constantly with recent security threats and vulnerabilities. For example, if you hear in the news about a new major cybersecurity breach, like just today, I'm reading an article about where another improperly configured server within Amazon allowed for Dow Jones Industrial information to be over between 2.5 and 4 million users' names, email addresses, and partial credit card information was revealed. So this is something to think about if you happen to be using Amazon servers, things like that. So you always want to stay abreast of these things and assess what is relevant to your business. And then the detection process comes up. What tools do we have where we can actually detect what's happening? Well, to know that, you've got to get familiarized with that normal baseline of your network that I referred to. How does each device use the network? What's its typical performance? How does it work on a day-to-day basis so that I can tell if something is out of the norm? For example, our live monitoring service uses a device that allows us to track the actual performance per port on switch to be able to say, here's the typical bandwidth of usage on this port. And if for some reason that usage starts to dramatically change, past a threshold, we can be notified, hey, there's probably an issue going on with this, and it's something that should be looked at. And from an employee perspective, they need to pay attention to how responsive devices are. For example, if you got a PC that's always working great, and it starts working really slow, especially, really, really slow, that might indicate, a breach of that particular host. And feel free, the employee should feel free to reach out to the InfoSec rep and say, hey, something's really weird going on here. Can we take a look at this? Because, again, it's outside of the normal baseline of activity. Additionally, you want to, track what devices are on your network on a day-to-day basis. And you're going to constantly keep looking at this at regular intervals and say, wait a minute, I had 46 devices. Now I've got 49. What are these other 3? Are they supposed to be here or not? And regularly look at this to see, have devices been added? They should be added to your baseline. If they shouldn't be there, they need to be removed and figured out, why they are there in the first place. Okay, so you can see we've got 90% was just taken up. There's a lot of time, energy, and effort that's put into what devices do we protect? How do we protect them? How do we detect an event if it occurs? This is where we're going to focus the bulk of our energy within any information security program. But let's say for some reason something still got through. Well, then we need to be able to respond to it and then recover when we're done with that. Now, I think the respond area of the framework is really the easiest to understand, and where we've probably most of us have spent our time and energy being aware of what steps we need to take within our companies. And a lot of times this has all been done, through thought processes, and rarely has it really been documented unless you've really implemented an information security program. So I'm not going to spend that much time going through the respond function, but it's basically what techniques can we use to contain the impact of the events. And this is really pretty straightforward. Assess the impact of the event to your organization. What's happening? How much impact does it have to us? We've already created an incident response plan, so now it's time for us to dust that off and actually implement it. Which means we need to contain and mitigate this incident. Example, if a suspect system is compromised, you think it's got a virus or something, you need to disconnect it from the network. You need to, basically compartmentalize that event to that one device, if at all possible. Additionally, you need to need to let all stakeholders and management know, hey, we are having an information security event. You need to be aware. We're handling it, but just bringing you up to date. You've got to provide status reports regularly. And if you need it, contact law enforcement. For example, FBI has, the full cybersecurity task force. You can contact the FBI if needed. The whole concept is you have an event, respond to it. Once we've responded, now we're back into the recover phase. How do we now go back to business as normal? What activities do we need to do to bring our company back and restore all of its capabilities? Previously, we talked about, you had to develop, a recovery plan. So now we're going to execute it. We're going to, let's say we've got a ransomware attack. We're going to restore the infected host back to its default status. Then we're going to restore any data files to that host that were there previously, and then restore the backup of any shared drives that were damaged in the event. Now, if this is on one system, that's not that bad. It's a little bit of time, effort, energy, and it's aggravating, but it's not the end of the world. But what about that hospital we talked about, where the entire hospital's server and systems were encrypted by ransomware? Sometimes paying the ransom is cheaper, and as aggravating as it is, it's a much cheaper response to do to get yourself back up and running and recovered, and then determine how do we prevent this from happening in the future. When you communicate activities to the stakeholders and management, you need to think about who you're actually contacting and what you're bringing to them. The executive and management teams are going to need to know overall what's happening. If there's individual departments affected, each of those need to be informed of what's going on, where things started, where things are at, and how we bring your particular department back online. How do we, put us back to business as normal? And you have to think about if the actual breach was customer data and information was released to the web or anything like that, or let's just say it's within your company, you've had a security breach, you need to potentially contact all of your vendors and say, hey, we had this happen, be aware, watch out for this. So when these things happen, typically you want to assign one person to manage public relations and ensure that from the company's perspective of maintaining reputation, who are they speaking to? Make sure that everyone who could be affected is aware of that so that it doesn't spread further. And if the company's reputation has been damaged, look at when Yahoo lost 1.5 billion addresses, or these security breaches we talk about. When this happens, you need to think about how you can repair your company's reputation. What steps do you take internally to prevent it? And then how do we market this to the world? This is all part of the recovery process. And then it can, brings us to I think the most important part of this postmortem is to prepare lessons learned from the incident. You want to ensure that a similar event doesn't happen in the future. So you've got to actually take the time and review how each phase of the InfoSec program has been affected by this. So take a look at the identify function. Do we need to adjust the current risk management strategy? What did we miss that allowed us to be where we're at today? When we're protecting, do we need to increase employee awareness through education? Or was it something else we needed to modify to protect ourselves better? On the detect function, did our detection processes detect this and either we just didn't notice it, or do we need to update or provide new detection processes because our business has changed and grown? And when we responded, how well did our response techniques work? Was it slightly impactful to the company? Was it really detrimental and we didn't have enough in place? Modify your mitigation techniques as we need to so you decrease the future impact to the company. And then when it comes to recovery, verify, did your recovery techniques work? Were they adequate? Or do we need to institute additional plans to make sure that if something like this happens again, we can recover correctly and more effectively or efficiently than we did previously? Okay, I know there was a whole bunch of information. Information security covers so many facets of our day-to-day business. It's hard to pinpoint down to the individual things, but hopefully I was able to define what information security is, what some of the potential risks to your business are, what the basic tools and concepts are that are out there to help protect information. And I think I've really illustrated why it's so important to actually have a formalized, written, documented, and implemented information security program within your company, and some of the basic, frameworks and ideas of how you do implement that program. Really any good information security program should follow the NIST Framework functions of identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And keep in mind that all of these areas are part of a living document, a living concept within your company that's part of the day-to-day business that has to grow and change and evolve as your company grows and evolves and changes. The threats are going to change, the threats are going to increase, your company's going to grow, your company's going to change. So as these things occur, you need to continually monitor and modify and upgrade your information security program as time goes on. All right, thank you very much for attending, and we haven't had that many questions, but let me dive into, see what we got here. Bruno, from what I hear, network is not just a job for home technology professionals anymore. It is an IT specialist job, and this is why it exists. How can we convince people to partner with IT specialists? I think it really depends on the risks that we're talking about in this area. Today's presentation, I really wanted to focus on the business itself as a starting point, as we're really trying to get into educating, business owners to understand that if you're going to provide network services or networking infrastructure or hardware to your clients, you need to start first of all within your own organization and implement information security programs that you understand and use on a day-to-day basis. Once you've protected your business and you adopted these concepts and your employees are aware of it from the ground level to the highest management, now you know how to more effectively develop and market these solutions to your customers who you are already developing and marketing networking solutions for. depending on how involved those particular applications and or projects are, will indicate whether or not it would be beneficial for you to hire an outside security firm, whether it's subscribing to different security services that are out there to keep your clients protected, or whether or not the client does not view that risk as something that's important. So there's a whole overall side of things to look at on your business, on how it relates to customers, and within your organization, how it relates to information being stored. I mean, a lot of what we went through on cybersecurity doesn't apply if your business does everything primarily by paper. Now you have different processes to protect loss and copies and things like that. So today was focused much more on the business. I will be doing future presentations that will focus more on residential audio-video integrators providing and applying cybersecurity concepts to homeowners. Alex, what appliances are recommended for information security? Well, I think you're seeing that when you're referring to an appliance, I have to assume you're talking, firewalls from a, first course of action to be able to prevent an attacker getting into your business. This absolutely is, your first step when you're contacting the internet. But then you also have to ensure that as you've done the risk assessment and risk management within your company to determine where you sit on your overall risk for the organization determines how much time and effort you put into keeping that firewall updated on a day-to-day basis with all current threats, what services that you will subscribe to and or implement within those firewalls, and then additional appliances within your organization could be network monitoring tools. And just having a tool that monitors whether or not a device is on or off the network, that actually is part of information security. You need to know when a device that's not supposed to be there is, but it's a very low portion. Most of the devices can do that, but how many devices can actually go in and monitor the actual bandwidth of a particular port and give you, 30, 60, 90 days of, chronological information to ensure that you have proper baseline reference points to notice that something is now out of the norm. That's a good portion of detecting, is realizing that there's an event in process. And again, so I don't know that it best answered what appliances are recommended, because every single side of your business is different from another person's business, and you have to look at where your attack vulnerabilities are and then use the appropriate policies, procedures, and or appliances to mitigate those vulnerabilities. Who knows how fast professional with a maintenance contract is supposed to upgrade a firmware to its clients when a new one has just been released? 1 hour, 20. I don't know that there's a particular standard for that, and I think a lot of that refers to my opinion, the need for ongoing service maintenance contracts. If you look at the IT world and IT industry as a whole, there are many different tiers and levels of maintenance contracts, and it is because of these issues. You have to constantly be aware of threats, updating for threats, maintaining firmware and software and things like that. And for us in the residential industry, which is where I primarily work, this has been something that's been more difficult to get clients to understand and adopt to. So I think it really depends on what type of a service agreement you have in place with that client. Minimum, once a year. But depending on how much information security is important to a particular client will depend on the level and cost of a program associated with that. I mean, if they want things that are updated every single day, there's a cost associated. Once a month, it's a lower cost. Once a year, different cost. But it is important to make your clients aware that for them to maintain the level of security or increase their level of security, it will require constant interaction over the lifetime of the products and the infrastructure that you have supported for, or provided for them. All right, everyone. That is currently the questions we've had for today. If the presentation will be available afterwards, so any of the links that you were looking for will be there. My information is in there as well. Feel free to reach out to our sales department if you have any questions or require any additional education on this matter. Thank you so much for attending, and I hope everyone has a great day.